Okay, so in this announcement about Stargate, we kind of reached this peak of AI spending, of this idea that AI is a moonshot, that you have to spend vast, vast amounts of money to achieve artificial general intelligence and to really make progress in this field. And then a couple of days later, this announcement came out from a Chinese company called DeepSeek that kind of threw a massive spanner in the works of that narrative. So, Chris, set this one up.
Yeah, that's right. So look, the reason that you commit $500 billion to data centers and buying NVIDIA chips is because it typically takes hundreds and hundreds of employees, sometimes thousands of employees, billions of dollars, cutting edge GPUs and massive data centers to train these large frontier models. And so you have to build massive data centers, massive power plants and power structures, and you have to buy these massive GPUs and array them into these huge arrays in order to train these incredibly powerful technologies. Or so we thought, because as you said, Yaniv, a few days later, this tiny little Chinese firm, which pivoted from being like a hedge fund.
I don't think it's even a pivot. I think this is just a side hustle of the hedge fund.
It's a side hustle of a hedge fund with less than 20 employees, with fractions of the money, like less than 8 million, I think was the reported number. They managed to train what they call a GPT-4 class model. So if you think of, ChatGPT 4.0, this is in the same class, and in some cases, on some benchmarks, better than ChatGPT 4. And it is, considered basically a frontier model. It's up there with GPT-4 and some of the characteristics of o1, and it's open source. It was made for fractions of like pennies on the dollar. And it is putting the fear of God in the entire investment community and the US ecosystem because it's come out of nowhere. There's a lot to say about this. They developed some new algorithms. They developed some new architectures. They've developed what they call a community of experts model, where instead of it being one model, there is a kind of an arbitrage model that sends the prompt to other smaller expert models. And it is more efficient. It's able to predict multiple tokens at the same time. So it's very, very fast. It has some kind of token compression where it's able to reduce noise from the training data and improve efficiency. It's got a lot of really clever innovations. But at the same time, we have to be very, very clear that it is essentially a distillation. It essentially trained from ChatGPT and possibly Llama and others. And so this thing, everyone's sort of acting like, oh my God, the Chinese have found a way to train models for, pennies on the dollar. They have certainly found some new architectures and new interesting approaches, but it would not be possible to train this model were it not for ChatGPT and other models that spent the billions of dollars in the first place. So really, they're for the most part, this is classic Chinese playbook of stealing and copying their way to outcomes. And I just think there's not enough people talking about the fact that this is not something that stands alone, and it's not something they can replicate in terms of staying ahead of the curve towards AGI and superintelligence if some of these frontier companies, real innovators in the US, just manage to protect their IP a little better and not let them do the distillation that they're managed to do.
So you've sort of taken it to the geopolitics, the fact that this is coming out of China. And I'd like to come back to that because what you're saying is perhaps valid in that sense, but in the economics of AI, what you said is kind of irrelevant, right? Which is, of course, this is a model that, is standing on the shoulders of giants, and everybody is standing on the shoulders of the giants who came before them, right? OpenAI wouldn't have been possible without the work done at Google around transformers and, neural networks go back to the 19th. This is not new. The point is, though, that the economics of AI have been questioned. We just talked about there being a $500 billion data center being built for this. This idea that every new model is going to be more expensive to train than the last one, and that we're talking about billions of dollars to train a frontier model, or, tens or hundreds of billions of dollars as time passes. And I think what DeepSeek have shown is that perhaps that's just not true, right? That you can train models a lot cheaper. Perhaps it's true, the first time around, you have to spend billions of dollars and then it needs to be distilled. But the economics are really problematic because then if you're OpenAI or whatever, you've spent all this money and other people can then take what you've built and create a much cheaper model. And by the way, it wasn't just cheaper to build and train. The inference side, which is the token generation when you actually talk to it, is much cheaper too. So that business model of raising and spending hundreds of billions of dollars to be this sort of base layer of AI is coming into question. And, of course, the stock market's reacted to that pretty savagely. So OpenAI is not publicly listed, but NVIDIA shares crashed. I think at one point it was 17% or something, which actually in dollar terms, because NVIDIA is a $3 trillion company, represented the largest single day wipeout for any company ever. Right. So there's just this idea that AI has to be massively capital intensive has come into question. And
Yeah.
the idea that the profits will accrue to those who do the massive capex is come into question. And so I think that's really the most interesting part of this story.
There's a couple of counterintuitive things that need to be considered. I don't think they're being talked about enough. I think this does mean that a larger set of very powerful but small models can be developed very quickly and cheaply. Specialist models fit for purpose and uniquely qualified to do certain things. But I think that creates more training demand, more GPU demand, not less. When things become cheaper, actually demand goes up and overall absolute utilization goes up, not down. And so I think this is actually good news for NVIDIA and good news for the power companies and the data center companies and what have you. I think it's counterintuitive, but it's going to ultimately turn out to be true.
There's actually a thing called Givon's paradox in economics, which is exactly talking about what you mentioned and sort of come up a lot in this context of DeepSeek, right? Which is when a resource becomes much cheaper, the overall spending on that resource often goes up because you get so much more for your money, more bang for your buck, right? And so a classic example is oil. Oil used to be really expensive to extract.
Yes.
And so the global market for oil was quite small. When oil became much cheaper to extract and much cheaper to buy, not only was more oil consumed, but more money was spent on oil. So even though it got cheaper, the amount of money going into it went up because a cheap thing can be used for more applications. And so that's exactly the theory here with AI, is that if AI inference in particular gets much cheaper, then there's just going to be a whole lot more usage.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm talking about. And so I think this bodes very, very well for NVIDIA. We all know how shit ChatGPT 3 feels compared to ChatGPT 4 and ChatGPT 4.0. It feels like a primitive piece of junk, right? And I think O1 makes 4.0 look kind of junky. And I think O3 is going to make O1 look junky. And I think there is this incredible innovation yet to come with one general intelligence and one super intelligence that this idea of like there's going to be tons and tons of little models everywhere and everyone's going to develop their own model. I think they're going to get smarter about protecting themselves against distillation, and they're going to get smarter about building models that are actually useful, because we know that 4.0 is actually not that good. And so building a 4.0 class model, that's like 2 generations behind. Everyone's calling it like they've managed to catch up to the latest generation. 4.0 is not the latest generation. 0.3 is the latest generation. And so these guys are already behind the curve. And I think they're going to be more distillation protection, and OpenAI is going to keep running uphill.
So just to disagree with you on this, Chris, like my understanding is that DeepSeek this week released a model called R1, which is a reasoning-based model, and that this one is actually at the same level as O1, and some people are saying even O3. So it's not actually the case that it's sort of in previous generations already. So, it's right at the cutting edge.
It, in some ways, catches up with O1, and in some cases does a little bit better. In some cases, it does a little bit worse.
Sure.
But O1 is not the state of the art. O3 is the state of the art. And in their labs, that's what they've announced. They got O3 Pro in the lab. They got O4. So yes, you can distill models from the current generation of stuff, but I think you're going to expect them to protect themselves against distillation and continue to run uphill and create models that have actual human level intelligence. Because again, we talked about this uncanny valley of cognitive responses that it's giving. I think this is going to be a blip on the radar for those 2 reasons. One is it's going to drive more NVIDIA demand, and there will be more specialist models. And we haven't seen what OpenAI can really do over the next couple of generations. And so I think this is going to be, it's not clear to me that this is like doom and gloom the way the market's reacting right now. I think it's overreacting.
I mean, to me, there's no way this is doom and gloom for AI, right? Like this is a great advancement in AI, in the economics of AI. There might be some losers from it in terms of specific businesses, but the idea that this is a bad thing that's happened for AI is bizarre, right? Because this is obviously a great advance. And like we were talking about with Jevons paradox and so on, it means more people will be using more AI for more things because the cost is lower.
The doom and gloom I'm talking about is there's doom and gloom about NVIDIA, there's doom and gloom about OpenAI, there's doom and gloom about the idea that you need billions of dollars to develop these frontier models, and that the US hasn't got as much as an advantage as it thought it did. I think all of that is really significantly overstated. I think we've seen Chinese companies steal, borrow, copy, trail behind. They're very, very good at that.
But to me, this is not about China, right? Like DeepSeek's just one example. They've actually, they're open source too. They've published the papers. I think if it's easy and cheap to create a frontier model, then there will be lots of companies making frontier models. Frontier models become somewhat of a commodity. Now, that is good news for everybody at the application layer.
I understand, Yaniv, but what I'm saying is it's easy and cheap to create a second tier model from the former models that were susceptible to distillation. So it's not a frontier model. It is O1. O3 is the frontier, and O3 and moving forward will likely have distillation protections. And therefore, I think it's an overstatement to say suddenly that you can create frontier models from other models. Because
Okay.
I think that's a temporary state that's going to be blipped by.
All right. But look, I'm still talking on the economics of this. I was speaking to a founder I've invested in yesterday, a friend who I really respect. He was talking about DeepSeek, and he was saying, okay, so O1 costs, this is at the API layer, $60 per million tokens. DeepSeek is $2. He said if he didn't have some free credits from Microsoft because he's accessing it through Azure, he said, if my credits were over today, I know I'm going to DeepSeek. So perhaps you're right, that OpenAI will always be a bit ahead of the curve. But if it costs 30 times as much, then the question is for a lot of people, is it worth it? And if not, then the economics of it start to collapse, right? Where OpenAI maybe just, the absolute frontier model costs 30 times more than someone who's 6 months behind. And, of course, there are applications when you need the very best. But how many of those applications exist? And how many people are going to say, this thing that's 30 times cheaper is good enough for my use case because it's really pretty bloody good. And that makes things really difficult for a company like OpenAI to invest that R&D in building that frontier model.
Yeah, so I'm not deep enough in the technology to understand this part of it, which is I'm not sure if it's cheaper because it was built more cheaply, or it's cheaper because of some of these inference time optimizations like token compression, token prediction, and team of experts architecture.
My understanding is both. It's both.
My bet is the next OpenAI models have some of this token prediction, token compression, token whatever, and they will quickly drop in price, inference time price. And so, the delta between the pricing, I think, will quickly collapse. And I think the competency of the model will continue to get much, much better. The true frontier will continue to get much, much better until I think the delta between why would I go to China's DeepSeek when I could use OpenAI's actual frontier model for nearly the same price? I think that's a distinct possibility.
It's a possibility, and we'll see. But I think that at the very least, I think you are kind of acknowledging the point that people are price sensitive, and that if the prices have gone down a lot, then companies like OpenAI are going to have to lower their prices to compete. And the question is, because, the price obviously consists of two things in a sense. It is the OpEx, like how much it actually costs to serve a query, that marginal cost. And then the CapEx, really, being able to amortize the huge investment you made in training the model. And the question is, if they cut the price so aggressively, are they going to be able to recover?
Yeah, but again,
all of that
we've
massive...
talked about that. We've talked about that, though. We've talked about that. They want the price to be as low as possible. They want it to be like oxygen. And they want to be powering all cognition everywhere. So that race to the bottom in pricing, they were doing that for themselves. Whether it comes from China, it comes from another model, it comes from them cannibalizing their own features, they're already driving the price as low as they can. They released O3 Mini, which makes O1, super, the same quality as O1, but for half the price. They're doing that anyway. So, I'm just not convinced that all of the narrative, I think, is so ass backwards. The price is going down, good, which means the overall inference is going to go up, Good for NVIDIA, good for everybody. The ability to create a frontier model is gone down. No, because they didn't create a frontier model. They created a sub-frontier model, and they created it through distillation. If you create safeguards against distillation and keep running and pushing the frontier, then you no longer have a frontier anywhere near a frontier model, right, in just a 12, 24 months. So I just think this is a little, like, really, it's overhyped. It really is.
You could be right. Again, I think DeepSeek itself is overhyped. I think what it does to the AI landscape, we'll see. But let's bring this back to founders, because this is happy days. Again, like I said, I was talking to this founder yesterday. It's a 30x cost improvement. You don't have to use DeepSeek to realize that, because as you point out, Chris, this cost reduction is going to trickle out through the whole ecosystem. You've got these big players who, first of all, going to try to copy a lot of that technology, right, to your point, Chris, and reduce their inference costs. They're also probably in the short term willing to take a loss on this stuff and, subsidize it to gain market share. And so if you are a founder working in AI, what you're getting is, I've seen this term, cost per intelligence, right? So it's basically how much you pay per token for a given level of model quality is plummeting, right? This is like Moore's law on steroids. You are getting so much more for your money than you did 6 months ago, 12 months ago, whether you are going to the absolute frontier or a level below, or one of these mini models, depending on your need. AI compute costs as part of your overall product development costs are going down and down. The intelligence you have access to is going up and up. That old cliche that today is the worst that AI is ever going to be is, it's continuing to have that really deep resonance for me.
You add today is the most expensive AI is ever going to be too.
Right. So this becomes really interesting. It's like you can afford to do more things with AI, build it more deeply into your application, into your development processes, everything like that. By the way, friend of the pod, Amir Shavat, he couldn't join us today, but he sent through a little quote, a post that he made on Blue Sky, where he said, ChatGPT didn't think it would lose its job to AI, did it? Which I think is very funny.
Yes. I was just also talking to a founder in Australia, and he was saying, people over here are skeptical about AI and healthcare and finance, and they're talking about, they're worried about privacy laws, and they're worried about this, and they're worried about that, and they're still, not clear of whether it's going to be worth investing in.
Yeah.
Man, guys, seriously, if you can hear the sound of my voice and you are sitting around playing skeptical about AI, can you please just delete your account? Get out of the game. You don't understand the game. Please get off the sidelines and start investing in building an AI. I just want to put that out there, because I heard that today, and I was so frustrated for Australian founders and founders in second, third tier markets. Please, guys, leave the country, go find investors who believe and understand in the frontier. And if you're an investor, get moving.
Yep.
You guys are just wasting your time.